Looking at this handwritten Sanskrit manuscript fragment, we are viewing the foundational architecture of the 12th chapter, the Dwadasha Samulasa, of the 19th century text, the Satyarth Prakash. It serves as a rigorous dialectical critique of Indian philosophical systems. The author focuses his investigation on the three Nastika, or non-theistic schools of Indian thought, the Charvaka, the Bauddha, and the Jaina. The text methodically examines these systems in a specific sequence, beginning with pure materialism, transitioning into subjective idealism, and concluding with atheistic eternalism. The author explores an ontological problem, the way a cosmological system reacts when a conscious first cause is removed, and the resulting reliance on infinite regresses to maintain its internal logic. Analyzing these ancient arguments provides a stress test of the epistemological boundaries required to construct any coherent model of reality.
The text seeks to determine if a system can account for the observer, the physical world, and the rules governing both without a central creative intelligence. The critique begins with the Charvaka school. Their foundational thinker, Brihaspati, argued that the entire universe and the human body are the result of an accidental combination of four physical elements: earth, water, fire, and air. This animation demonstrates the Charvaka theory of consciousness. They argued that consciousness emerges spontaneously from dead matter, comparing it to the intoxicating power that appears when fermenting mundane ingredients. From this physics, they derived a strict ethical conclusion. Since the physical body turns to ash upon death, and there is no afterlife, the sole objective of human existence is maximizing worldly pleasure and accumulating wealth. In this photograph, we see a ritual fire pit where liquids are poured with precise metal rods. Charvaka philosophy mocked these specific Vedic rituals, like the Agnihotra, along with ascetic practices, dismissing them as frauds invented to secure a livelihood for priests. They also directed a logical attack at Shraddha, the practice of ancestor worship. The Charvaka argued it is physically impossible for food offered on the ground floor of a house to sustain a traveler on a journey, let alone reach a soul in heaven. To defend these claims, they established a strict epistemological limit. They accept only direct perception, or Pratyaksha, as valid knowledge, and wholly reject inference. The Satyarth Prakash counters this by arguing that mindless, inert elements cannot self-organize into complex biological machines. Furthermore, dead matter cannot experience the sensation of intoxication. Therefore, consciousness must belong to a distinct, non-material entity. The text then deploys a subject-object refutation. An eye can perceive external objects, but the eye cannot see itself. From this, the text concludes the perceiver observing the material world must be distinct from the material world it observes. The most damaging critique attacks their epistemology. Claiming that only perception is valid is a self-defeating argument, as the ability to function in reality, or to even construct a philosophical argument, requires the use of inference. This suggests that a materialist model lacks the internal consistency to account for the very consciousness attempting to define it. Without a non-material observer, the experience of a continuous reality remains unexplained. The critique then shifts to Buddhism, addressing four distinct schools: the Madhyamika, the Yogacara, the Sautrantika, and the Vaibhasika. Despite their differences, all four share a foundational doctrine called Kshanika, or the theory of absolute momentariness. Look at this geometric matrix collapsing into a single empty void, representing the Madhyamika claim of Syadvada. Now the void expands into a mental projection of a mountain, strictly confined within a human head silhouette. This is Yogacara subjective idealism. The text defines the remaining two schools. The Sautrantika argue external reality is only inferred, while the Vaibhasika argue it is directly perceived. All four schools categorize existence through 5 skandhas, or aggregates: form, processing, experience, naming, and afflictions, and the 12 ayatanas, the sensory and motor bases used to interact with the world. The text refutes the Madhyamika void with a logical trap. The conscious entity that perceives and knows the void cannot itself be void. The act of knowing establishes a dual reality consisting of both a knower and the known.
It then addresses the Yogacaра's internalism. If a mountain exists solely as an idea inside the mind, the literal physical mass and volume of that mountain would have to occupy the human chest. Because this is physically impossible, external objects must exist independently of the mind.
Next, the text dismantles the doctrine of momentariness. If reality is nothing but a series of momentary, disconnected flashes, memory, or pratubhignana, breaks down. The ability to recognize oneself as the same person who had a past experience requires a continuous observer. Finally, it critiques the Buddhist axiom that existence is purely sorrow. If existence were only pain, no soul would possess the motivation to act. Goal-oriented action requires the presence of both pleasure and pain. Building an ontology on fleeting moments and voids fails to account for a stable reality. A continuous observer is required to anchor memory, action, and any potential state of liberation. Moving to Jainism, the text establishes a linguistic point using historical Sanskrit lexicons. The terms Buddha, Jina, and Bauddha were historically used as synonyms for atheistic systems, even as their specific doctrines diverged. Look at these unclothed ascetics sitting on the marble floor facing temple idols. They represent the Jain rejection of an eternal creator. In this system, finite human souls achieve absolute knowledge through extreme asceticism to become gods, or tirthankaras. To explain the universe without a creator, they rely on 6 Dravyas, or fundamental substances: Jiva for soul, Pudgala for physical atoms, Dharma for motion, Adharma for rest, Akasha for space, and Kala for time. An 8-mile-wide well fills with millions of microscopic human hair fractions, representing a time epoch called Paleopama. The mechanic: 1 microscopic hair is removed every 100 years. A paleopoma is the time it takes to completely empty this well. This expands into extreme physical claims, describing the continent of Jambudvipa and claiming the existence of biological organisms like 96-mile-wide lice and 8-mile-wide scorpions. The logical refutation here focuses on limits. A finite soul, bound by physical action and existing in a finite body, cannot logically accumulate enough power to transition into an infinite, omniscient God. The text also provides a physical refutation. Inert atoms, or Pudgala, cannot self-assemble into a functional universe. The author compares this to expecting wheat to harvest itself, bake into bread, and walk into a stomach, all without a baker. Without a conscious, organizing first cause, metaphysical systems hit a wall. They substitute rational physics with physically impossible sizes and infinite timelines to explain how reality functions. The text then deconstructs Jain ethical practices. Citing primary Jain texts, it points out a rigid sectarian dogma, the assertion that only the Jain path is true, all other deities are false or kudeva, and that non-Jains are worse than venomous snakes. This doctrine mandates social behavior, such as barring followers from interacting with, speaking to, or even providing food to anyone belonging to a different faith. Jain asceticism demands a practice called kesh luncheon. To prove detachment, ascetics must rip 5 handfuls of hair directly from their own scalp. In this photograph, notice the white rectangular cloth tied across the mouths of the ascetics. This is worn to avoid inadvertently inhaling and killing microscopic airborne organisms. The text argues this creates a direct contradiction. The deliberate infliction of physical pain is itself an act of violence, hinsa, which violates the principle of non-injury the ascetic seeks to uphold. The mouthcloth faces a physics refutation. By restricting the exit area, the cloth acts as a nozzle, forcing expelled air out at a higher velocity. This inflicts greater kinetic trauma on airborne microbes, while simultaneously hindering the wearer's linguistic pronunciation. The final refutation is sociological. The presence of sectarian hatred and social isolationism exposes a lack of true universal compassion within the system. Claiming an absolute ethical high ground without a rational, universal theological foundation results in hypocrisy and self-harm. Here are the 3 dismantled frameworks: materialism's clustering elements, Buddhism's momentary void, and Jainism's self-assembling atoms rotating out of sync. The central light ignites, casting lines that pull the chaotic geometries into a synchronized system,
representing the necessary unifying axiom, the conscious first cause. Epistemologically, a continuous conscious observer is required. Without it, memory, identity, and objective reality cannot exist. Ethically, morality without a universal theology fractures into dogmatic, sectarian hatred and irrational physical extremes. The Satyarth Prakash proposes that a complete philosophy must unify empirical physics, strict logical epistemology, and universal ethics, a synthesis the text maintains can only be found within the Vedic framework.